Hello, everybody. Welcome on into This is MLS. The semifinals are here, and that means one team is 3 wins away from being an MLS Cup champion. And these 3 guys, always champions in my book. We've got Mo Adu. Why are you laughing, Doyle? Kalen Carr and Matt Doyle. Why are you laughing at that?
Oh, because I'm sitting next to Kalen, memorably 0 for 2, 3, 4?
2. Winners.
Yeah, 2.
Yeah, that's cool.
Winners.
Forever
winners.
3 wins from an MLS champion.
It's always next year.
There's always next year. That's right. That's what I keep telling myself. The international break gave us this past weekend off. Mo, you were in Vegas hanging out with Travis Scott and Luis Figo. Casual. What were the 2 of you doing?
Not that. That sounds pretty good.
You know what is close by? The MLS Cup Conference semifinals. 8 teams remain, and it is now single elimination. Each game is going to feature extra time and then go to penalty kicks. And here's your bracket. Orlando City and Atlanta United, a little rematch from Decision Day. 9th seed Atlanta taking down Messi in Miami over 3 games. Meanwhile, New York Red Bulls swept the reigning champions, the Columbus Crew. New York City FC beating FC Cincinnati over 3 games to get us to the Hudson River Derby. In the Western Conference, things a little bit more straightforward. 3 of the top 4 seeds remaining. LAFC taking on the Seattle Sounders. The LA Galaxy will host 6th-seeded Minnesota United. And that means we have a very high percentage, guys, of heading out west for MLS Cup. LAFC, the winners of the West, have the priority, then the LA Galaxy and Seattle. Orlando, the only team from the East that can mathematically host. And hey, there is a chance that we could be going to Allianz Field, where it's the home of Minnesota United. And what illustrates the chaos of the playoffs so far than the MLSsoccer.com bracket challenge? There was 12,000 plus submissions. How many perfect brackets remain?
Not mine.
Spoiler, none of you 3 or
Had to be
me.
somebody from Atlanta to begin with. That's just if you were to scope geographically.
Okay.
But other than that, I still don't think you could get
12,970. How many? Give me a number.
2.
2. Okay.
Yeah, 0?
0. Mr. Adu?
I'm going to go with 5.
5. Okay. You guys were all in the realm. 3.
Oh, wow.
There were 3 that were correct. And riddled me this. 2 of them had New York City FC winning the whole thing.
Wow, they should be here. They should take
wow.
our job.
Yeah, right?
They should be sitting
Well,
right
you don't
here.
know this, but we want those people to shout us out, and they're getting a Mo Adu and Kalen Carr signed jersey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Not Matt Doyle signed
okay.
jersey, though. But,
From the crates.
No, Doyle, you and I are going to get on there too.
all right, yeah.
We're going to get on
Good.
the sleeve.
I like it.
Write your article on it. Yeah.
Well, where we're starting off, then we'll make those 2 people very happy. Let's talk about the Hudson River Derby. The New York Red Bulls traveling to New York City FC, kicking things off on Saturday. Kalen, safe to say that in the decade that this rivalry has existed, this is the highest stakes meeting yet.
Well, it's funny because I think we were sitting here about a month ago, and you guys asked me the same question. Is this the biggest Hudson River
But the
Derby?
playoffs hadn't come yet.
I know, but this was jockeying for playoff position, but I thought at that point that these 2 were potentially going to meet in the playoffs. I thought, look, one's going up against the defending champions, the other one going up against the Supporters Shield winners from last season, and so now the fact that this has happened, I think this has to be. Sometimes I think we get a little bit too caught up in rivalries and overhyped, but this one for me has the juice, especially right now with a wide open Eastern Conference, with Miami going out, Columbus going out, and now it being pretty wide open. I think the fact that, all attention is now going to look, I think, on the West Coast to the 2 LA teams, of course, but then also when it comes to this next round and this matchup, Hudson River Derby, I think, has to be the most intriguing of the ones that I see on the table.
And what I would add to that is I love rivalries, I love derbies, but I love this one because it features so many homegrown players on either side. And to me, in those kind of games, rivalry games, the players that grew up a part of this club, supporting this club, whether as fans, as mascots walking out for games, to now be able to fast forward and play in a game of such significance, a win or go home to represent the club that you grew up supporting, that means so much more. It adds a different dynamic to these kind of matches. Guys like John Tolkien, your Tavon Grays, your James Sands on the opposite end. So I'm excited to see the energy, the passion that players like that bring into this kind of matchup, especially, as you said, in a game with such high stakes and the biggest that we've seen of this rivalry.
On the other side of it, for the New York Red Bulls, Emil Forsberg, the star who was brought in to change this team, dealt with an injury mid-season, Doyle, but he was healthy and he was fit and he was producing in the postseason, and he completely changed the complexion of this New York Red Bulls team, sweeping the reigning champions. What is it about his game?
He brings that high-level quality that Red Bulls fans have been asking for a decade now, and even Red Bulls players. Like, how many times have we sat on this show with Sasha and Brad, and they've said, we were begging for the front office to add one more piece, a guy like this, and he has produced. Anytime he's been healthy, they've been a much better team, and we saw it against Columbus. But what he does specifically is stuff like this. He gets the rest of the attack playing downhill, and this comes hand in hand with the way the game model has changed this year under Sandro Schwartz. They've drawn like a lower line of confrontation that allows the rest of the attack to have more room to run into, and that makes all the sense in the world when you've got a 33-year-old playmaker in midfield who anytime he gets on the ball, can immediately put these guys into space with a touch. So I think it's a really smart melding of a skill set and a particular player and the game model all together. And for 3.5 months in the middle of the season when he was injured, we didn't get to see it. And the Red Bulls looked like the worst team in the world. And now that he's back, they look like a team that could win at least one more game.
In the whole
conference
world?
final. I mean, they were terrible, Jill. They won 2 games in 3.5 months. That is bad soccer, but one guy, when he has a skill set like this, can change a lot.
Yeah, and for me, you don't sign a player like this and ask him to just run around the pitch like a chicken with your head cut off. And that's not what he's going to do, right? So he allows them, to your point, to change the model, to bring something different. And then the other part for me is just that personality, that experience from playing in big matches, in the World Cup, in Champions League. That's something different for a young group. You mentioned the homegrowns, Mo. Some of those guys, when you're walking out the tunnel and you look over your shoulder and you say, okay, we've got a match winner here that can really pick the tempo, understand when to put his foot on the ball, when to go quick. And I spoke to Emil Forsberg right before the playoffs, and he mentioned that, trying to bring that belief, that leadership to the group. And I think you saw that, the way he was able to get control of the ball against Columbus and then find Lewis Morgan in space. Question mark as far as his fitness in this match. That will be key to watch. But that's the one thing. He didn't start in either of the last Hudson River Derbies. They lost both of them by some margin, and the last one especially came off the bench. So that's where you say, okay, now we have this guy back, and you might believe things might be different.
The key for New York City was the goalkeeper, Matt Freese, Mo. 13 saves in that round 1 of playoffs. How big was he?
I mean, Matt Freese was incredible for NYCFC. The numbers that you just spat out there, it just kind of adds a little bit of context to what we saw from the eye test. Obviously, making 3 penalty kick saves in a shootout, your name's going to be mentioned, and it should be. But over the course of the season, Matt Freese was big for NYCFC. He kept them in the position of being in the playoffs. He kept them higher up the table. It's the saves. It's the way that he's really emerged this season as a leader for this group of players. And if you think back to NYCFC, when they had success, when they went on to win MLS Cup, who won MLS Cup MVP? Their goalkeeper at the time, Sean Johnson. So for those out there looking at NYCFC, those 3 guys who have the perfect bracket and they have NYC going on to lift the cup, they're going to be looking at Matt Freese to repeat the performances that he's put in thus far throughout the regular season, as well as in the playoffs. And maybe, dare I say maybe, NYCFC will be lifting a cup, and he might be having another goalkeeper as the MLS Cup MVP.
You're trying to appeal to those 2 people out there of the 12,000 plus, aren't you? Aren't you, Mo?
I'm a man of the people. I'm a man of the people.
Doyle, NYCFC had the New York Red Bulls number all season. They beat them in both meetings. They outscored them 7-2, and they did it with the press. With a healthy Forsberg, though, on the other side, can the press be as effective?
I think it can, but what we've seen from the Red Bulls after they got killed 5-1 in this game that we're watching right here is they've stopped building out from the back like this. They have stopped trying to be a team that plays a little bit of small ball. Like, they still have that Red Bulls DNA, and so they've been more willing to blast long balls over the top. Ooh, you don't want any back passes like this one, but they've been more willing to blast long balls over the top and play for second balls in the midfield. It's not back to what it was under Gerhard Struber or even before that under the likes of, Chris Armas or Jesse Marsch. Like, they still do want to play a little bit more, but they have just excised this part of the game from who they are as a team in the month since they had that 5-1 loss, because they really realize that in the highest level, in the games with the most at stake, they probably can't do it yet. Like, that's something that maybe they add a little bit more of in 2025, but in this one, look for them. Like, if there's any doubt, they're going to boot it long and they're going to play for the second ball.
Yeah, a big thing to watch in the first 5 minutes especially is that press, because in both matches earlier this year, New York City scored in the first 5 minutes. And so I think that's a key, especially after the long layoff. Red Bull had more momentum, a little bit of a break as well coming off that win. Now they have to go on the road across the river to New York City. So I think the beginning really of every match after this long layoff, but I think specifically in this one, Red Bull need to come out with the right attitude. Otherwise, they could find themselves in a hole early.
The second game on Saturday night takes us all the way out west to the home of the Western Conference winners, LAFC, who will be hosting the Seattle Sounders. The Sounders, a team, guys, that people always expect to be in the postseason. This is a side that has qualified all but one of Seattle's 15 years in MLS. But there's a more important streak that we need to talk about today, and that's that the Sounders have not beaten LAFC Doyle in 3.5 years. Regular season, postseason, Open Cup, Leagues Cup, you name it, Steve Cherundolo has Brian Schmetzer's side figured out. Why or why not on Saturday night, Doyle? Will it be more of the same?
Brian Schmetzer has said that they have something up their sleeve. They've looked on the film, they've looked at the tape, and they figured out a little something of their own. But every time I watch it, what I see is one team has high level match winners, and the other team's guys just aren't quite as good. And it's primarily Denis Bouanga, but it's also at times Mateusz Bogusz, and even now maybe Olivier Giroud could get in on the action. Virtually all of these games over the past couple of years, Seattle's had long stretches where they look like the better team. They just haven't been able to capitalize on their chances. And then this guy, Ryan Hollingshead, gets in on goal and makes a play like that. Or this guy, Denis Bouanga, is able to go over the top, run away from the defense, and put the game away. It happened that way last year in the playoffs. It's happened in the regular season. In the U.S. Open Cup semifinal back in August, it happened off a set piece. There's always just that little bit of quality difference between these two teams, and it's why, LAFC are fine, you can have the ball, you can try to make the game. We know we're going to get those one or two chances, and we have confidence in our guys when they do.
And Doyle, I'll agree with you. Because I've called a couple of those games this season, and the biggest difference is LAFC take their chances consistently. Yes, they create more chances than Seattle in the run of play as well, but they just have lethal finishers on their team. Guys like Denis Bouanga, Mateusz Bogusz, they stand up every time their name is called upon. For Seattle, if you're not going to create as many chances or getting as many looks on goal, you have to be lethal. Where I do see Seattle having some kind of a foundation to lean on is defensively. Defensively, this team has a spine and, more importantly, a back line and a goalkeeper that have been one of the best in MLS throughout the course of this season and over the years. And so if they can come out, limit LAFC from getting that early goal, because once LAFC gets ahead, they're comfortable. So if they can limit LAFC and stop them from getting that early lead, they can potentially find their way into the game, utilize set pieces, maybe get a goal in transition that makes this game interesting. But I do agree with you that the biggest difference is just the level of quality in the top-end players on either team.
For LAFC, the striker position has been an interesting one. And I don't think when we said, Olivier Giroud is coming here this summer, that any of us thought that we'd be continuing to talk about who's the starting striker for LAFC. But here we are. There has not been a go-to striker. It's a three-way even split between Mateusz Bogusz, Olivier Giroud, and Kai Kamar. Giroud, World Cup winner, brought here to be the starting striker, and he has been since he arrived this past summer. Until Mo, against Game 3 versus Vancouver. You were on the call for this game. Giroud started the first two. Decisive Game 3, Steve Cherundolo makes a change to Mateusz Bogusz, and the 23-year-old, not to mention, has the one goal in the 1-0 winner over the Whitecaps. Saturday, it is a single elimination game. Who's your starting striker?
It was interesting, right, that Steve Cherundolo did make the decision. I think people were calling for that change to happen. Bogusz has played as a 9 throughout the course of the season and done well from that position. I'll be curious, though, now with this break, this little bit of time off, whether or not he sticks with Bogusz. When I look at Olivier Giroud and his lack of production from the number 9 position for LAFC, I don't apportion all the blame to him. It's not as if he's getting 50 chances and just not taking his chances. LAFC just haven't found a way to utilize him in the best way. But I will say the 2 goals he scored have been, in finals, right? In big moments. So in a conference semifinal, Steve Trundle, he's spoiled for options first and foremost, but I look at him and I think he's probably going to lean towards going back to Olivier Giroud. The biggest thing for me, though, is what formation they'll play in. Because if they play in a 3-back formation, I'm not sure that's the way they've played that has really suited Olivier Giroud's characteristics and what he brings to the team. You mentioned Matty Bogusz scoring the goal in the last match against Vancouver in the second half. In the second half, they were playing in a 4-3-3. I think that actually maybe plays a little bit more towards what qualities that Olivier Giroud has and brings to this team. So I'll be intrigued to see what Steve Trundle rolls out from a formation standpoint. In either scenario, Matty Bogusz knows that he can do a job in that position. If he's not in as a number 9, he'll be wide. Olivier Giroud, it's time for him to deliver on what everyone has expected of him from that position.
It's a big decision to be made as well for Seattle. Pedro de la Vega was brought here, Doyle, to be the guy for Brian Schmetzer. He's had injuries, we know that, but he hasn't been the guy. Now's his chance. It's the postseason. Is there any reason why Brian Schmetzer can believe that now in the conference semifinals, De La Vega can be the guy?
It's kind of hit and hope at this point that he can be. They need someone to be a match winner, as they said, and a lot of it, I think, will come down to what Mo was just talking about in terms of LAFC's formation choice. If LAFC play that 5-2-3 with the open midfield, you'll see De La Vega hopefully getting on the ball in a lot of productive spots in the half spaces, just like Ryan Gauld did for Vancouver. And Gauld was the best player in that series over the course of 3 games. It was just that Brian White couldn't quite finish the chances that Gauld was creating. De La Vega can get on the spots there, on the ball in those spots. De La Vega can put Jordan Morris through, and Jordan Morris has a little bit of playoff equity, a little bit of big game equity. So the hope is that, hey, he was terrible against Houston in the first round, but he's saving it all up for the big game against the LAFC. And if he's not the one to do it, the Sounders are up against it a little bit. Like Albert Rusnak could still do it. Christian Roldan's had some big moments, but the guy wearing the number 10, the guy with the big price tag, he is supposed to be the answer in games like this.
And it was that first match, his first match against LAFC, where he came on, he made he made a few good plays, he grabbed the ball, took the penalty, finished it, and that's what we thought was going to happen. The one thing I would say is it's been a disappointing year for him, but something about the playoffs, if you find that one moment, we talk about this from like a club perspective to say, hey, this didn't go the way we wanted, fresh start. From a player's perspective, it can present the same opportunity. So if I'm De La Vega, I think this is a chance to say, okay, let's put this behind us and see if I can really make a difference in the biggest of matches.
And you could see in that series against the Dynamo, this looked like a man who was trying to hit a home run with every single touch. Like every time he was getting on the ball, he was pressing to try to make something happen instead of just making the right play. And over the course of the back half of the season, when he finally got healthy, he was actually effective when he was just part of the buildup, when he wasn't trying to unlock the defense with every single touch. I think we'll know really quick which version of De La Vega is on the field.
Absolutely. Mo, how much of this comes down to the managers? Steve Cherundolo has beaten Schmetzer in every meeting since he took over for LAFC 3 years ago.
That just sounds like madness when you hear it first and foremost. But yeah, to me, this game is going to be won off the pitch, and it's going to come down to some of the things that we've already discussed, right? From a Steve Cherundolo's perspective, you've beat them 4 times this year. You beat them in the league, you beat them in League Cup, you beat them in Open Cup, right? Now you have your 5th opportunity to go ahead and keep that streak going, but that comes with pressure itself. Does he stick with the same formation that's worked in the last 3 games, the 5-back system that Doyle was talking about? Or does he go to a 4-3-3, which, as I mentioned, I think maybe suits Olivier Giroud a little bit more? And then on the opposite end, Schmetzer, right? This is probably very, very unfamiliar territory to go up against a manager, against a team that just really has been your bogey team. And now he has a chance to kind of wipe away everything that's happened this season and get the win, which would be in the biggest competition for them this season, MLS Cup, and have them going to a conference final. It's a tough task, but from a personnel standpoint, from an approach standpoint, from a tactic standpoint, all of that has to be dialed in perfectly from both managers. So I'm intrigued to see who pulls the right strings, who's able to motivate their players in the best way possible, and who's able to also make the in-game decision that can now steer the game in a certain direction to ultimately have their team moving on to the next round.
Yeah, Mo, you mentioned that halftime switch from Cherundolo to go to 3 in the midfield, and part of that was because things weren't working. It was frustrating for LAFC. They were turning the ball over, and Vancouver were able to win balls there and go quickly. And when you think of the chances that Brian White had, honestly, if he could put one of those away early in the first one or even in the last matchup, they likely go through in this. So if you say, I'm Jordan Morris, you can create those same opportunities, win the ball. That center of midfield battle is going to be huge for the Sounders. Obed Vargas back into the team after international duty with Mexico. Coming back in, João Paulo, Rusnak healthy. If they can get the ball and go quickly, and Jordan has had a few looks, he has to take those opportunities when they come, because you do not want to go down early or at all against LAFC, because they just absolutely lock it down when it gets to that game state.
There's 2 more games on Sunday. Shall we discuss those?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. 4th seed Orlando City taking on everybody's Cinderella story, the FEA team, Atlanta United, the 9th seed that took down Messi and Miami to get themselves to this point. 10% chance on decision day to make the playoffs. They did their part. Atlanta United beat Orlando City to get on this run. Orlando, the only top 4 seed remaining, which is incredible in the Eastern Conference. So, Doyle, arguably, Orlando's path through the East should be clear. Is anything less than an MLS Cup appearance a failure for Oscar Pareja?
I do think so. Yeah, I really do. And part of it is, like, you look at it, they have the highest remaining seed of the Eastern Conference team. So if they keep winning, they keep having home field advantage. But part of it is, since Martino Hayda moved into the starting lineup as the number 10, this has been one of the handful of best teams in the league this year. So yeah, pressure's on this man right here. One of the great coaches in MLS history, Oscar Pareja, has never really had a great playoff run, but it's opened up for him to do it this year.
As for Atlanta's manager, Mo, you were around Rob Valentino when we covered Atlanta United. What has allowed him to be so successful? We've heard the locker room discuss it. We've heard the analysts discuss it. What's the key?
First of all, with Rob, just as a person, incredible guy, very clear on his morals and the values that he has as a person. And I think he brings that to who he is as a manager as well. You hear him in press conferences, you hear the same kind of messaging that comes from the players about what he's brought to this team. And it's all very consistent in terms of communication, in terms of being attention, detail oriented. But I first of all, take a step back, right? When you're an interim manager, you're a placeholder. You're there to steady the ship, stop the bleeding, maybe fix what's broken. And for Rob Valentino to now be in that position a second time, it's been impressive to see, because you've seen growth in terms of his first stint compared to his second stint. So much has happened in this second stint with firings, with selling of players, having to integrate new players, integrate a DP into the team. And somehow he's found a way to utilize his man management skills to get the buy-in from the whole group, to have this group truly believing and motivated that they can go out and do the unthinkable, which was, first of all, to qualify for the playoffs, then to get a penalty kick shootout victory against Montreal after allowing them back into the game, and then to do the unthinkable, which was going to Miami and getting the result there, knocking out Messi and company. So Rob Valentino, I give him his flowers. He's doing an incredible job with Atlanta United. And this is also, again, interim role. You never had a preseason with a team. You never had a chance to really bring in your players. You're just taking what's been handed to you and saying, let me apply what I know about this group, about this culture, find how to make the players, find out what makes each player tick, and how can I make this group believe? And so I love the approach that he's taken thus far. The players seem to love it. The fans are obviously incredibly motivated and inspired yet again. And that's what we need out of Atlanta and that market, to have the fans back in the building, passionate about their team, believing in their team, and allowing them to dream.
The twists and turns in the saga of Atlanta United, Doyle, are truly endless, because there's a common denominator in all of this. President and General Manager Garth Lagerwey of Atlanta United was in the same position with Seattle in 2016.
Yeah, it was a little bit different because that Seattle team didn't tear it all down midseason. They added Nico Ladero and then rode that to an MLS Cup triumph, which of course got Brian Schmetzer the full-time job. And here he is in 2024. We're still talking about Brian Schmetzer in the playoffs. that is a path, Rob Valentino. You want this job. You've seen how it's been done in the past. Win a few more games. And honestly, he's done a nice job, and I think he will be considered for other positions. I think the only way he gets the full-time job in Atlanta is if they're hoisting a trophy at the end of the season.
You have to point out, too, Seattle became elite at that point in the season. I think in 2016 they finished 4th in the Western Conference. And Lagerwey's in his 3rd tenure as a GM. RSL Seattle now, Atlanta. How much does a front office want to put the stamp of hiring their own guy?
Yeah, I mean, Garth Lagerwey's...
How much does that play into
Garth Lagerwey's been doing this 15, 18 years.
Doesn't he want to hire a head coach?
He's literally never hired his own head coach. He's never been able to, because first it was Jason Kreis at RSL,
right.
and then he moved to Seattle, and they made the painful decision to part from Siggy Schmid, and then they kind of kicked the can down the road because things were going so well with Schmetzer, and Schmetzer just took the job. So Garth has never gotten to do it. I think he would. I think he would like to do that this year, but at the same time,
love to put that on the old resume, huh?
If the other option is Rob Valentino wins an MLS Cup, so Rob Valentino wins the job, that's a pretty good option.
Can I make
too.
a point?
Yes, please.
Most GMs aren't judged by how many head coaches they've hired. That's generally a sign that you haven't done a good job. So I'd much rather have the predicament of saying, well, I haven't been able to hire somebody because we've been winning trophies.
Our roster's so good.
Yeah, and
whoever we
and they've done a good job of putting pieces around him. So the case for Valentino for me is if you are able to maybe add some more experienced people to a staff. I know they have Carl Robinson, but put good pieces about him. Rob Valentino has the part that you can't teach, which is the part of man management, being able to get the belief in the players. And if you take down Lionel Messi and Inter Miami and the best team in MLS history, according to pretty much everybody, although I would think, the MLS Cup is still the most important trophy. I think there's a real case to say, hey, but I like the fact that he's fighting every day for this job, and that's something that's going to resonate amongst the players, because tomorrow for any of these guys, you don't really know. Dax, all these guys retiring, whatever it is personally, but he's gotten this group to rally around them and fight for everything.
Speaking of Dax, it was those guys, the men of the Kalen Carr generation, Dax McCarty and Brad Gazan, who stepped up big for Atlanta United. Dax McCarty stringing together 3 straight starts. Brad Gazan making some of the saves of his lives. Kalen, though, can you continue to rely on the veterans against a team like Orlando City, who plays very differently than a team like Miami?
Absolutely.
You're going to rely on those 2 guys first and foremost.
Yeah. You have to, and I think in this case especially, number one, Brad Gazan for me has been the player of the tournament for MLS Cup playoffs. When you think of the wild card match that I did in Montreal, where he was going basically toe to toe with his former teammate Joseph Martinez, and then pushing them along. The saves that he's made have just been absolutely ridiculous. Even the ones he didn't make, getting up and fighting with the rest of the team, like the personality that this group brings, and I need him to stand tall once again and continue that form and inspire that belief. So I fully believe that Dax as well can play a big role in this one. He's from Orlando. I think the idea that he's now going to get a chance to try to win his first MLS Cup trophy is obviously driving him and this group. So yeah, I'm not going to back out on the OGs or the vets at this point, because they've still proven it that they're able to make a difference in these big games.
Dax McCarty was on Extra Time Radio. Nice little interview there, giving some really good insight to this team that I actually hadn't heard yet. So take a listen to that. Should we talk about the 4th seed Orlando City? Let's give them a little bit of love. And Doyle, somebody that you've been giving their flowers to is Martino Ojeda. Yeah,
he's earned all of it. It took a while for him to earn Oscar Pareja's trust and thus earn a spot in the starting lineup as the number 10. And look, there are 2 things about Martino Ojeda being in that position that really have turbocharged Orlando City. First of all, he's a natural chance creator. He's gonna score a goal right here, but that's not his calling card. His calling card is setting up other guys. And second of all, he's not their best player. Facu Torres is their best player, but Facu Torres is not the type of attacker who wants the ball at his feet to then make the game, to unlock the opposing defense. He's a guy who feeds off of space created by the rest of the attack, and that's what Martin Ojeda has done. He's super dynamic with his off-ball movement. He gets them downhill. It's like the Emil Forsberg thing, but in a different way, because with Orlando City, with Ojeda on the field, they get downhill from possession. And that's one of the hardest things in the game to do, is to be a team that's knocking it around, having good possession, and then even when you have the opposing team pinned into the final third, to create penetration off of that. And Ojeda is so dynamic and so smart with how he moves that he opens up spaces for Orlando to do that. As I said, they have been one of the very best teams in the league since he moved to that number 10. It's just a bog standard 4-3-3, a little bit more emphasis on attacking down the left because that frees up Facu Torres to go 1v1 on the right. It's all clicking. They are the clear favorites in this game, and I think in the Eastern Conference.
Orlando City was one of 2 teams in MLS to finish the regular season with 6 wins in their last 8 games. Who was the other one?
Oh boy.
Spoiler, they are in the playoffs. We haven't talked about
Minnesota
them yet.
United.
Minnesota United. Woo, there we go, everybody. Minnesota United, who will be heading to the thanks, Mo. Thanks, Mo. What do you want, a 7-second delay? That was funny. Minnesota United heading to the LA Galaxy, who will say, this is polite, have the more manageable side of the bracket. The Galaxy swept the Rapids, outscoring them 9-1. Mo, I think you know where I'm going with this. On this very show in September, you said whoever wins El Tráfico in September, which was the LA Galaxy, would go on to MLS Cup. Are the LA Galaxy going on to MLS Cup? Are they the winners of the Western Conference?
Well, I got a grudge to pick with the Galaxy for that exact reason. Because, as you said, I said whoever won that final El Tráfico game would win the West and be an MLS Cup. Well, Galaxy won. I expected them to go on and win the West. But when it came time for them to show me that they are ready for games of real significance, a game to clinch something, to clinch the West, they dropped the ball on the road at Houston. So I'm a little bit vexed with them. Listen, I still think this is one of the most exciting teams still in the competition. When you have 3 guys on your team with 10+ goals and 10+ assists, you always have a chance to win games. And so, although I see Galaxy in a favorable position, the fact that they lost home field advantage is where I have a little bit of question marks. Because if it's an El Tráfico for the conference final, I lean towards a team that's playing at home, and that would be LAFC. But I still look at this Galaxy team as incredibly dangerous. They can cause problems. Marco Reus has been coming off the bench. I mean, so you talk about quality and different avenues to create goals and score goals. Riqui Puig has been an absolute beast throughout the season and in the playoffs. Talent all around, but just the fact that they lost home field advantage on that final day gave me a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth and maybe dropped them to second tier for me in terms of them versus LAFC.
As it should, because we could have a Western Conference El Tráfico final on our hand. Kaylin, you thinking LAFC is the better team than the LA Galaxy this year?
I always go with the team that has been there and done it. So I think from that standpoint, the Galaxy have to play the challengers. But it is a little funny to me that the Galaxy feel like they're not a big part of the discussion around MLS Cup. And I think a big part of that was because the East was really where everybody was focused, from Inter Miami and Columbus. And then, yeah, you mentioned LAFC, but then it's almost like the Galaxy got left behind or forgotten in that standpoint. And same with the MVP race. Riqui Puig, for me, is still the best player left in the playoffs. And this is the best attack that's left in the playoffs for sure now. So you look at this attacking weapons they have, the complements. They've started to figure it out. It's a little tighter around the back now as well. But it's weird because it was so easy for them against an injured Colorado team that it almost feels like they haven't really begun their playoff journey here. And that's the worry a little bit going against a team like Minnesota United that has a little bit more of that, hey, we had to grit our way through this to get through into this round. But I think people are sleeping on the Galaxy and are about to start waking up to see how dangerous they can be and maybe win this whole thing.
Doyle, you're putting your eyebrows up. Before we move on, who do you think's better right now, the LA Galaxy or LAFC?
I think that the Galaxy played much better soccer in the first round, but I would pick LAFC. They have so much knockout round equity. Since Steve Cherundolo took over, they've been to, I think, 6 finals in the past 2.5 years. It's hard to pick against that, even though just aesthetically, I love watching the Galaxy play. They're so brave with the ball, and they do crazy things in terms of their structure, and it leads to, sometimes they just look unstoppable like against Colorado, but sometimes it leads to counterattacks going the other direction. And as Mo said, they lost first spot in the Western Conference because of that. It wasn't just on decision day. If they had given up 1 fewer goal over the course of the season, they would be first in the Western Conference because that's how far down the tiebreakers we went. It was goal differential that we went to, or excuse me, it was goals differential that we went to. And if you look over the course of the season, even when the Galaxy are playing well, they give up cheap goals because they give up possession cheaply all over the field. So I'd pick LAFC.
The Galaxy's opponent, Minnesota United. It's been an up and down year for them, experiencing the ups right now. But you have to go all the way back to the beginning of the year to realize how far this team has come. We were talking about Emil Reynoso at the beginning of the year and how he was still in Argentina. Eric Ramsey, the youngest manager in MLS at 32 years old, he survives that. He survives the regular season, and he gets his team to finish as the 6th seed in the Western Conference. This year, regardless of what happens on Sunday, still a success?
It's a success no matter what. They could lose 15-0. It's a success. It was a successful first season for Eric Ramsey and Khalid Al-Ahmad, the CSO there. But especially because what they did in the summer window has worked. Kelvin Yeboah, huge part of that up top. Joaquin Pereira hasn't been quite as influential, but he's been pretty good as that sort of secondary playmaker next to Robin Lod. And then, putting Carlos Harvey into that back line to step in, and Diaz with his distribution. They have an identity now in terms of how they play, and it is more against the ball than with it. But as you can see, when they're playing with the ball, they can do some stuff to you in the final third. And I heard it said somewhere, I can't remember where, Jill, that they won 6 of their final 8 games in the regular season. And you look at the principles of how they play, and a lot of it is trading possession and field position for space to run into. But it's not just 1 or 2 guys doing that running. They always end up with like 3 or 4 options in the box on these breaks. And look, that is tough for the Galaxy. That's exactly what the Galaxy have had trouble with all year long, even when they're playing well. So I think we know exactly what Minnesota United's going to do with this game.
But you know who also loves running? The LA Galaxy's Riqui Puig.
Oh, boy.
4 goals so far in this postseason.
Not running defensively.
Running at the goal. Towards the goals. The man loves the big moments, and a single elimination game at home is certainly that.
Well, first of all, just to Doyle's point, 16-0, it's got to be a failure. I'm sorry. I got to draw the line somewhere. No, and with Riqui Puig, you know what? You guys we're joking about him doing most of his running going forward, and that's what we expect. He's a number 10, creative player, goal scorer, goal creator. But I would say in the back half of the season, I started to be a little bit more impressed with his defensive work rate. But what I love about Riqui Puig is his personality. It's the way that he always wants the ball, no matter where he is on the pitch, no matter how tight the situation is, his ability to consistently create, to consistently score goals. You guys are talking about his running. I mean, the last 2 games, right, in the playoffs, goal in the 87th minute, goal in the 91st minute, goal in the 93rd minute. First of all, that shows Greg Vanney's trust to keep this man on the pitch that long when the game's already done and dusted against Colorado. But he trusts his player, and Riqui Puig has rewarded not just Greg Vanney, but LA Galaxy fans, his teammates around him. I think it helps that Gabriel Peck and Joseph Paintsel have come in and have been hits for LA Galaxy. But also, Riqui Puig has just shown this level of accountability. At times, it used to seem as though it came across as, whiny at times. But I feel like this season it's manifested itself more in a leadership type vibe. But this is the occasion he wants. He wants this responsibility. He wants this pressure. So far, he's delivered, and I expect against Minnesota, Riqui Puig to continue on the form that he's been in on the course of the season and deliver another standout performance against Minnesota.
Puig loves the home crowd too. 13 straight games at home with a goal or an assist. So it is going to be a tall task, Kalen Carr, for Minnesota United goalkeeper Dane St. Clair.
Yeah, it's a big challenge, of course, but when you think of just the defensive structure that Eric Ramsey has set up, though, this 5-4-1, it's been really difficult to break down. They've only allowed 2 goals in their last 7 matches, and there's not a lot of space between the lines. But I'd expect Riqui Puig to, of course, pick and probe and find a way through. And ultimately, at that point, you need someone to come up with a save. And that's when St. Clair has stepped up. I think of the early save against Luna that changed the game. kept them in it. And then when it comes to penalties, he's talking to the shooters. He's in the crowd. He's doing the "it's over" tribute over to I believe that is Vince Carter from Toronto as well. But I texted him too after the first penalty shootout to say, "Hey man, congratulations on big time saves." And he's like, I got some more. I got some more coming. And he did. And I think that personality that he brings to the group, they're going to need him to step up in a big way. But I think the system in front of him has to play tight because that attack from the Galaxy is ruthless.
There's some good personality
He's a
in
Turk.
this game. Go ahead, Mo.
there it is.
What do you have to say?
No, I'd say he's a Turk. What do you expect? He's a Turk. Of course he's got personality. Of course he's telling you there's more coming from him. He's a Turk,
somehow we're talking
man.
about Maryland. Oh, okay.
Just saying.
Where's Taylor Twellman? Where's Taylor Twellman when you need him? Doyle, where's this one going to be won and lost on the field?
In central midfield, where the LA Galaxy win or lose the ball. It's actually going to feel a little bit, I think, like Orlando City versus Atlanta, because I think Atlanta's going to force Orlando to try to make the game through central midfield, and we saw Atlanta do that really well against Miami and use those turnovers to create instant counterattacks into the seams. Same thing in that game for Orlando versus Atlanta. Same thing in this game for Minnesota versus the Galaxy. I wouldn't be surprised if Minnesota had like 33% possession. They're going to give LA the ball and say, okay, Riqui, try to make something amazing happen and go wherever you want to go to do it, because we know that there are going to be a couple of turnovers when you do that, and that is going to give us an opening to create an attack. And when Minnesota's done that down the stretch, what was it, Jill? 6 wins in their
8.
final. Look at that. Look at that. Bring the facts.
It's like I know what I'm doing. It's like I do some
It's
research.
like that. It's
Go
like
figure. Well, we have a jam-packed weekend for you here on MLS Season Pass. On Sunday night, you've got Minnesota United traveling to the LA Galaxy, and then LAFC and Seattle battling it out on Saturday. And then 2 rivalries I love that for us, in the East. Orlando City and Atlanta on Sunday, and the Hudson River Derby, New York City FC, and the New York Red Bulls starting everything off on Saturday. We have some news to discuss before we go. Miami, they might be out of the postseason, but Inter Miami is still making headlines. This week reports Tata Martino will be leaving Inter Miami for personal reasons. Mo, what was your reaction to that?
What are these personal reasons? I mean, I was surprised. I was surprised because Tata, to me, was a big part of this team's success. He's a big part of the glue that kind of kept everything together. When you have big personalities at clubs like Inter Miami, the likes of Lionel Messi, Luis Suarez, Jordi Alba, Busquets, etc., you need a manager who's capable of knowing how to manage these teams, right? Because to me, it goes beyond just the X's and O's. It's more about man management skills and how do you incorporate the rest of the team around these players, the young players. And I thought Tata Martino, over the course of the season, over the course of the time that he's been at Miami, has done a really good job of doing that. So I was surprised, and obviously more information will be released over time as to what the true reasoning is behind it. The other part that stood out to me was, is this something that had been brewing over the course of the season? Or is this something that happened abruptly because of a fraction or something that happened as a result of them dropping out and losing to Atlanta? But very, very surprised and intrigued to see where Miami go next, because it's easy for a manager to leave or easy for a player to leave, but it's always intriguing to me of how easy it is to replace that position. So for Tata Martino, if this ends up being exactly the case, that he is gone and it is done and dusted, I think it's a loss for Miami and a piece that's going to be pivotal to them if they actually want to go on and win MLS Cup.
And manage massive personalities.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a little surprised, Doyle, that you could win the Supporters' Shield and still have things break apart. I thought that was the trophy that everybody, keeps everybody together.
I mean, it is. It's unquestionably the best trophy, but sometimes when you have Lionel Messi on the team, one trophy's not enough.
No, I had to take a shot there. But I do think that it does raise some questions for me as far as the overall, I guess, Inter Miami project and the Messi project overall, because ultimately, for me, it has to be MLS Cup. And I go back always to David Beckham, which is the only closest comparison we can have, and him having to go through adversity and then ending up getting multiple titles, MLS Cups. And that's where it has to be for Miami and Inter Miami and Messi. They have to get it done. And this is the only type of manager that has MLS Cup to his name and Messi experience. There's nobody else out there like that. Not to mention that when you constantly change, you have a new manager coming in, and you have no institutional knowledge or understanding of MLS and the intricacies and complexities of that. So now this team is a team that's continued to have to shift the roster. They're going to have to do that again. They have to try to put these pieces together on the fly, and I understand the core is Lionel Messi, the greatest of all time. But it makes me question, what does this look like next year in high pressure, the biggest pressure on maybe any team we've seen in MLS history with trying to get over that final hump with Messi? And the fact that now this change happens, for me, makes it less likely that we see this realization come to bear, because sometimes you have to stick together even in the hard times and get over that hurdle even through the adversity. And once it breaks up, that's where I start to have more questions than answers for Miami.
It's widely speculated that the next manager could be Spanish legend Xavi, former teammates with Lionel Messi at Barcelona. So it would be more of Messi and friends at Miami. Is that the correct profile to go for next?
Javier Mascherano is another one. He's the Argentinian U20 coach, another guy who is a teammate with not just Messi, but Suarez and Busquets and Jordi Alba as well. At this point, I assume it'll be one of those two guys. And look, I agree in large part with what Kalen and Mo were saying. Like, Tata's done a lot in this league, and having that experience in MLS has often proved determinative in terms of your success. But Tata at one point didn't have any experience in MLS, and his 2017 Atlanta United side took the league by storm, and in 2018 they won MLS Cup and played some of the best soccer in league history in so doing. So there's nothing to say that whether it's Xavi or Mascherano or someone else that we're not thinking about, there's nothing to say that it can't be something like that in 2025.
But that's 2 years, right? Do they have 2 years?
Well, that's the thing.
Tata Martino had more time, though, than 2 years, because he was part of Atlanta United before there was even a team. And when I spoke to him about that, he's told me he equated that job a lot to like PlayStation. He was like, I literally got to do every manager's dream. I had a budget. I got to put some players together. Of course, Carlos Bocanegra in the front office, Darren Eales were all a part of it, but so was Tata Martino. So the one thing I will say, it always felt like a 2-year project for Tata, regardless if Atlanta United won MLS Cup. And we don't know when this decision was made.
We don't, though we think that this had been brewing for a long time. From what I've heard internally from Miami, there was some discontent from those big name players with Tata over the second half of the season. One person I talked to in Inter Miami said it's like Game of Thrones in here. There are a lot of people who are trying to vie for. Yeah, if Messi says, I want Xavi, you have to do everything in the world to get me Xavi, then it'll be Xavi. But to bring it back to the Atlanta United thing, you're right. Tata had a big hand in choosing that roster in 2017, 2018. This roster's already chosen. This roster already has MLS experience. This roster already has CONCACAF Champions Cup, Leagues Cup, and now playoff experience. This roster is already shown to be 25 players deep. Whoever they bring in, like they can afford to learn on the job a little bit, because the players already know the deal. The players already know what it's like to win in MLS and what can cause you to lose in MLS. So whether it's Xavi, Mascherano, or anybody else, like this team is going to be the favorites in 2025.
Another team had some coaching news this week. FC Dallas naming their new manager in Eric Quill. Has an abundant amount of success coaching New Mexico United in USL. Played for FC Dallas during, the Dallas Burn era. Doyle, are you surprised, though, that they didn't stick with their interim manager in Peter Luxon?
I think in the end I wasn't, because Luxon's overall record, 8 wins, 10 losses, 3 draws. They made performing well in the U.S. Open Cup and Leagues Cup a priority. Well, he played 3 games or managed 3 games in those 2 competitions. They lost all 3. If you look at them down the stretch, I think they lost 3 of their final 4 games to close the book on their playoff chances. So there just wasn't enough in that body of work for Luxon to get the job. And Eric Quill, 1 year with New Mexico United, he had them top of the USL Championship Western Conference. Also had a really good run in the U.S. Open Cup. And then if you look at that resume, what he did with North Texas half a decade ago, sort of getting that project off the ground for FC Dallas. So he has roots with FC Dallas in terms of player development. He had identified young guys like Chris Richards, who was a big find for them back in 2017, 2018 or so. So he checks a lot of boxes. I thought that New Mexico team played a lot of good soccer this year. I know the underlying numbers weren't great, but they won some games. If it wasn't Luke Son, this was the obvious choice, and now here we are.
Yeah, it did feel like the longer this went, the less likely that it was going to be Luke Son, because I had seen enough that it felt like they were heading in a good direction at least. But this makes sense from the standpoint of somebody that understands the club. You mentioned that time with North Texas. He also brought along Ricardo Pepi, even worked with Nkosi Tafari, even some of the guys on the current team. So I think they're going to go back to maybe some of that youth development model. They're spending big with Petar Musa, some sort of focal pieces that we haven't maybe seen in the past. Velasco's still on the squad. We'll have to see what happens with him and Jesus Ferreira. But I think he's going to go back to going to that youth development model that we've seen FC Dallas be so successful at, and see if he can bring some more players up through that academy and break through in the first team again.
That does it. We have the people all set for the MLS Cup Conference semifinals. Can you believe it? It's here. After this weekend, there will be 4 teams left in this 2024 season.
Getting down to it, Jill.
We sure are.
Let's see if we keep those perfect brackets for the 3 of you guys out there.
Yes. You guys better get to signing those jerseys that we promised them that I never told you about. Okay?
We'll do it.
That does it for This is MLS. For Mo Adu, Kaylin Carr, Matt Doyle, I'm Jillian Sakovits. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.